The ground is frozen, a jagged sheet of white iron that bites into the skin of a starving mother in the winter of 1944. She isn't looking for gold, and she isn't looking for diamonds. She is digging for a ghost. Above her, the shadow of an empire looms. The Nazi hunger plan has already stripped the French countryside of its wheat, its cattle, and its pride. Potatoes have been seized for the front lines, leaving the civilian population to wither. But beneath the frost, a silent titan is waiting. It doesn't ask for permission to grow, and it certainly doesn't care about the decrees of a dictator. As her frozen fingers clutch a mud-caked root, she finds the one thing that cannot be blockaded, cannot be taxed, and refuses to die. This is the story of a plant so aggressive in its desire to feed you that it was erased from history, not because it failed, but because it was too successful to be owned. If you want to break free from fragile food systems and reclaim control over your calories, stay with me, because once you learn this plant's secret, you'll never look at food the same way again. And if this kind of knowledge matters to you, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Welcome to the era of the unkillable harvest. Let's dig into the secret of the sunroot. Imagine a food source that views neglect as a fertilizer. We've been told that farming is hard work, that it requires constant tilling, buying, and sweating. But that's a lie sold by those who profit from your hunger. For thousands of years, there was a crop that broke every rule of modern farming. It yielded double the harvest of potatoes, survived the cold that killed wheat, and once you planted it, you never had to buy seed again. It was the ultimate insurance against famine. The archive opens along the eastern shores of North America in 1605. A French explorer named Samuel de Champlain lands on the coast of what would become Massachusetts. The Algonquin people welcome him with a feast. Among the dishes is a knobby root they call kaishuk panak, the sunroot. Champlain tastes it and writes in his journal that it rivals the artichoke of Europe. This is the sunchoke, Helianthus tuberosus, a perennial sunflower root native to the Great Lakes and eastern woodlands. Long before Champlain, the Iroquois told a story. When Earth Woman died giving birth to twin sons, Sapling and Flint, the first sun chokes grew from her feet, a crop born from sacrifice. The plant towers over a man, 8 to 10 feet tall, crowned with yellow sunflowers that follow the sun, but the treasure is buried beneath the soil, white, purple, and gold tubers storing sweetness as inulin, not starch. Tribes planted it once and harvested forever as it spread through underground rhizomes like a network of veins. One patch could feed a village for generations. In 1805, Lewis and Clark nearly starved crossing the Dakotas until Sacagawea saved them. She found mouse caches, thousands of sunchokes gathered underground by mice for winter. She dug them up, roasted them, and fed the expedition. The yield was staggering. A single plant produces 3 to 6 pounds. An acre yields 64,000 pounds without irrigation, while potatoes yield only 53,000 pounds with irrigation. This was survival itself, not luxury. When Samuel de Champlain carried the first holds of sunchokes back to France in 1605, he wasn't just bringing a new vegetable. He was bringing a potential revolution. At the time, Europe was a continent defined by the hunger gap, that desperate period in early spring when winter stores had rotted and the new harvest was months away. Soils across the Old World were exhausted, depleted by centuries of monocropping wheat and barley. Famine wasn't an anomaly, it was a scheduled guest. The sunroot spread like salvation. The French called it topinambour, after a Brazilian tribe they mistakenly associated with the plant, while the Italians called it girasole. It was a miracle for the peasant class. Unlike the wheat they grew for their lords, which required heavy tilling, expensive seed, and perfect weather, the sunchoke required nothing. You tucked a tuber into the dirt in March, and by October, you had a mountain of calories. If you left just one fragment in the ground, a full crop would return the following year, stronger than the last. But this perennial abundance created a massive problem for the emerging structures of the modern state. You see, The power of a government is often measured by its ability to tax. Wheat is easy to tax. It must be harvested all at once, brought to a central mill to be ground, and stored in visible granaries. It is a legible crop. The sunchoke, however, is invisible. It stays in the ground, frozen and protected, until the moment you need to eat it. You cannot easily count it. You cannot easily seize it, and because it replants itself, you cannot control the supply of seed. By the mid-1700s, the industrial machine made a choice. It chose the potato. While the sunchoke was nutritionally superior and required less labor, the potato was easier to scale for a factory-driven world. Potatoes grew in uniform shapes, making them easier to wash and peel by hand or, later, by machine. They could be stored in massive warehouses for months and shipped across continents without bruising. The sunchoke, with its knobby, irregular, ginger-like shape, was a nightmare for the industrialist. It was difficult to clean, it bruised easily when moved in bulk, and it had a thin skin that caused it to spoil quickly once removed from its protective soil. The corporate agricultural system requires uniformity to thrive. It needs every unit to look and behave exactly like the next. The sunchoke refused to comply. It matured when it wanted, grew in the shapes it chose, and insisted on staying attached to the earth. As the potato became the king of Europe, the sunchoke was pushed to the margins. It was labeled as primitive and difficult, relegated to animal feed, fit only for the pigs that had the patience to dig it up. In North America, the very land where it was born, settlers began to treat it as a common weed. They preferred crops that required them to return to the seed merchant every year, crops that reinforced their dependence on the system. The sunchoke survived in the ditches and the forgotten corners of old farmsteads, a silent titan waiting for a time when the efficient systems of the world would finally break. The true test of a crop is not how it performs in a laboratory or a wealthy supermarket, but how it stands when empires fall and the supply chains of the world are severed by fire and steel. The sunchoke is not merely a plant. It is a survivor of the greatest catastrophes of the 20th century. Its history is written in the frozen mud of occupied Europe, where it became the final line of defense against state-sponsored starvation. The first major awakening of the sunchoke's power occurred during World War I. By 1916, Germany was strangled by an Allied naval blockade that prevented the import of fertilizers and food. That winter became infamously known as the turnip winter. The potato crop, the foundation of the German diet, had failed due to blight and a lack of labor. Thousands died as they were forced to eat rutabagas and turnips meant for cattle. Yet, in the forgotten fields and the edges of the woods, the sunchoke was thriving. Because it was recognized as a weed by the authorities, it was never seized or rationed. It was a hidden calorie reserve, waiting underground for the desperate hands of those who knew where to look. But the most harrowing chapter was World War II. In 1940, Nazi forces occupied France and implemented a brutal hunger plan. They systematically seized 80% of all French produce, including nearly the entire potato harvest, to feed German soldiers and the citizens of the Reich. What remained for the French families were the forgotten vegetables, rutabagas and the topinambur, or sunchoke. For 4 long years, millions of people survived on this tuber. It was the only crop the Nazis couldn't effectively seize because it didn't grow in neat, predictable rows that could be easily counted by a bureaucrat. It was wild, hardy, and persistent. In the Netherlands, the situation reached a breaking point during the winter of 1944, known as the Honger Winter. Over 22,000 people died as the Nazi regime cut off food shipments to the western provinces. The government began publishing emergency cookbooks instructing people on how to prepare wild plants, tulip bulbs, and, most importantly, sunchokes. Mothers would walk for miles in the snow, digging into the frozen iron ground with their bare hands to find a single, knobby root to feed their children. The sunchoke didn't care about the blockade. It stayed protected beneath the frost, keeping its nutrients intact while the world above it burned. However, this salvation left a deep psychological scar. After the liberation, the sunchoke became a symbol of shame. Because it was eaten every single day out of absolute desperation and often prepared poorly, people grew to loathe it. In France, a whole generation of grandparents refused to ever see a topinambour on their dinner table again. To them, it tasted like occupation. It tasted like defeat and the smell of the damp earth they had to crawl over to survive. The vegetable that saved millions of lives was discarded the moment the crisis passed, buried by a world that wanted to forget the trauma of hunger. But the plant didn't vanish. It retreated back to the ditches and the roadsides, waiting for the next time the civilized world would fail its people. It remained 73 calories of pure resistance per 100 grams, packed with iron and potassium, holding the secret to survival for those willing to remember what the rest of the world chose to forget. While the history of the sunchoke is defined by war and survival, its internal chemistry is a biological masterpiece that challenges the very foundation of modern nutrition. To understand why this plant is forbidden, you have to understand the difference between how the world wants you to eat and how your body was designed to thrive. Most of our modern staples, potatoes, white rice, and wheat, are built on starch. When you consume starch, your body rapidly converts it into glucose, causing a spike in blood sugar that the pancreas must fight with insulin. Over time, this cycle leads to the metabolic collapse we call type 2 diabetes. But the sunchoke is different. It doesn't store energy as starch. It stores it as inulin. Inulin is a complex, non-digestible carbohydrate, a prebiotic fiber that the human stomach simply cannot break down. Instead of being absorbed into the bloodstream as sugar, inulin passes through the small intestine completely intact and reaches the colon. This is where the magic and the controversy begins. In your gut, inulin acts as a high-octane fuel for beneficial bacteria, specifically bifidobacterium. These bacteria feast on the inulin, multiplying and producing short-chain fatty acids. These acids lower the pH of your colon, creating an environment that is hostile to pathogens while helping your body absorb critical minerals like calcium and magnesium that would otherwise pass through you. In the 1980s, diabetics discovered that by replacing potatoes with sunchokes, their insulin requirements dropped by as much as half because the inulin provided sweetness and satiety without the glucose spike. It is a biological miracle for the metabolic age. However, this same miracle is what led to the plant's unfortunate nickname, the fartichoke. Because inulin is fermented by gut bacteria, it produces gas in people whose microbiomes are not accustomed to high-fiber diets. In our modern world of ultra-processed, low-fiber convenience food, our bodies have forgotten how to handle real nutrition. We demand instant satisfaction without the side effect of a working digestive system. Industrial food systems hate the sunchoke because you cannot fix the gas without removing the inulin. And if you remove the inulin, you remove the very thing that makes the plant a superfood. In the 1960s, a produce wholesaler named Frida Kaplan tried to solve the image problem by rebranding the knobby tubers as sunchokes. She trademarked the name in 1980, and sales jumped 600% as high-end chefs in San Francisco fell in love with their nutty, earthy flavor. But even with a fancy name and a place on the menus of five-star restaurants, the sunchoke remained a threat to the status quo. In the 1980s, during the height of the farm crisis, Midwest farmers tried to grow them for fuel and food independence. It failed not because the plant didn't grow, but because there was no corporate infrastructure to process a crop that didn't need constant chemical inputs. You can't make a profit on a plant that works better than the medicine you're trying to sell. The story of the sunroot is not a tragedy of the past. It is a blueprint for a future that is rapidly approaching. As we stand on the edge of climate instability, the crops that feed 8 billion people are revealing their fatal flaws. Our global food system is built on stability, the idea that the rains will always come on time, the frost will always wait until November, and the supply of synthetic fertilizers will never run dry. But that stability is an illusion. Wheat, corn, and traditional potatoes are annual crops bred for a world that no longer exists, a world of predictable patterns and corporate control. The sunroot, however, was born in chaos. It is the ultimate tool for the era of food sovereignty because it refuses to die. In the world of permaculture, it is often called the Holy Grail because it represents a one-time investment for a lifetime of returns. When you plant 3 tubers in the autumn, you aren't just starting a garden. You are installing a biological engine that will yield 30 tubers by spring and hundreds more by the following year. It outproduces corn while using only 1/3 of the water, making it a fortress of calories in the face of increasing drought. This uncontrollable spread is exactly why industrial agriculture labels it invasive. In the language of the state, invasive is the word used for anything that succeeds without permission. Anything that does not need a middleman, a seed patent, or a chemical company to survive. The sunroot reminds us that control is an illusion. It grows in poor dirt, it cracks through compacted clay with its powerful roots, and it survives temperatures down to 30 degrees C. It is a plant that insists on your freedom. We have been tricked into believing that we are dependent on a system that is designed to fail. We have forgotten that for thousands of years, indigenous wisdom preserved crops like the sunroot specifically because they enabled sovereignty. They were crops that couldn't be taxed easily, couldn't be seized by a passing army without a shovel, and couldn't be monopolized by a corporation. From the Algonquin people who shared this sacrifice gift with the world, to the French families who survived Nazi occupation, the message is clear. True security is not found in a supermarket aisle. It is found in the soil. The era of the unkillable harvest is here. You don't need a massive farm to reclaim your calories. You just need a small patch of dirt and the willingness to remember what they tried to make us forget. By planting the sunroot, you are taking a stand against the fragility of the modern world. You are choosing a crop that outlasts empires and persists through the worst winters of human history. Abundance was always here, growing in the dirt, free for those willing to dig. We did not lose the sunroot, we simply looked away. But the plant never left. It is still there, waiting in the ditches and the forgotten corners of the earth, holding the key to our survival. It is time to open the vault. It is time to plant the forbidden yield.